Welcome to Get Real, How to Live a More Authentic Life, with psychologist and author of over 75 books, Dr. Barry Weinhold.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Get Real, How to Live a More Authentic Life with Dr. Barry Weinhold. My name is Ashley. Dr. Weinhold, how are you today?
I'm grateful as usual.
Love it.
Also grateful that it's starting to look like spring.
Me too.
Been a really hard winter, but we've had more snow than usual.
Oh, interesting. We've had less. Maybe you got ours.
And actually, the mountains got really dumped. So it helped a bit with the drought in Colorado and also helped feed the Colorado River, which has to provide water for I don't know how many millions of people. As it goes downstream into Utah, Nevada, Arizona, and California.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yes, and it often dries up before it gets to California.
Oh, that's a problem.
By the time it gets through California, it's dry.
Wow.
Never reaches Mexico, hardly ever.
Interesting.
But this year, I think it will. The snow in the mountains has been more than usual, and skiers are very happy.
I was going to say that's probably pretty good for tourism, too.
Yeah, it is.
Wonderful. Well, what do you have in store for us this week?
Well, you remember last month I was really focusing in on the fact that all mass shooters are men, and it led me to think about what is it about the way we raise boys where some of them end up being mass shooters. And I'm going to hit one that is really important to me today. I mean, I'm working with a lot of clients in their 20s, and the biggest issue they have is separation from their parents. And I'm seeing that as a rite of passage for many. I work a lot with men, so I have more data on men. But the young men that I work with in their 20s or late 20s or early 30s, that's a big issue because most of them have this kind of relationship yet. They're the kid, and this is their parent. And what we want to try to do is get it to where it's this way. And what I'm seeing is that there are kind of indigenous rites of passage that seem to be present in mainstream culture, and then in also some of the lesser mainstream cultures. And I have a guest on later that's going to talk about how rites of passage happen in his culture, as a Latino culture. But first of all, I want to talk about some of the ideas that what families or what mothers and fathers, and I often think fathers need to take the lead in this. So I have a list that I want you to put up on the screen, and then I'll go through them. And these are kind of ways to create a rite of passage in your family. First of all, get out of their way and help them make their own age-appropriate decisions and learn from the mistakes. If you hover too much and try to shield them too much from their mistakes, they won't learn them. And that's part of growing up, and it's part of the rite of passage from teenhood to adulthood. And then progressively giving them more responsibilities around the house and things that they could do. Of course, they probably have an allowance for that, but they can, as the responsibilities increase, the allowance might increase. Or at that later in teen life, many of them are working and having their own income. Help them develop their own code of conduct. And what does that mean? Well, it means they have to know what is appropriate behavior and what isn't. Now, some of that is going to be taught by modeling. Dads have to model that for their sons and daughters. what does dad do? How does he conduct himself? And mom too, but I think dads have a kind of a leadership role to play in that. And then along with that, for mindfulness and honesty, uh, that really mindfulness is just to uh, think before you act a little bit. Basically, if there's a door to go through, think about what might be on the other side before you open that door. Uh, and then teaching them how to regulate their feelings. This is one thing that many are re-regulate if they get their feelings get dysregulated. And how you do that is again modeling and listening to their feelings, helping them by treating their feelings as with respect and treating them seriously, whatever their feelings might be. And then it's important in number 6 to be a parent first, and then a friend second. And I think those are kind of things that as you interact with your teens, you have to kind of see how that works for you, and then create a meaningful rite of passage. And I'll talk a little bit about what some ingredients of that might look like in a little bit. But I want to finish this list, and then I'll talk a little bit about that. So this may vary within each family and culture in this country. And then number 9, forgive your mistakes and theirs. Uh, uh, a child growing up into adulthood needs to have a cheerleader as well, not just a punisher. And so forgiving mistakes and also being able to admit your mistakes when you make them, because there's no such thing as a perfect parent. And to try to become perfect and pretend you're perfect really creates a false kind of interaction with your teenagers. And then don't let them have a relationship with your guilt. You know, a lot of parents realize they didn't do the best job they could have done, or they look back and with some regrets about some of the things they did or didn't do, and they feel guilty. And so you want to make sure that your children don't have a relationship just with your guilt. They have a relationship with you and not just your guilt. And I've encountered a number of my clients who have that relationship, that their parent acts in a guilty way towards them and they feel it. It doesn't feel real to them. And they tend to want to just dismiss that as not really what is going on with my parents. What do you think about those, Ashley?
I think you're right on the nose as usual. A lot of those are definitely things that I've flagged, and my son's 8, so not quite
Not yet.
teenager.
Uh-huh.
But I can already see the things that we need to work on, and the things that we didn't quite develop in early development, such as the how to deal with your emotions in a healthy way, and being mindful is something we've talked a lot about. In just the way we interact with the world around us. That's a new one for us. And I think, like you said, the modeling really is what it comes down to. And we've talked about this before, but not getting hung up on the fact that I may not be 100%, committing or, doing these things well myself, but that doesn't mean that I can't still try and talk to him about it. And as much as I can model the behavior, that's great. And if I have days where I'm not modeling it, then we talk about that.
Uh-huh. But it is important to, they talk about early development where 2-year-olds receive over 200,000 no's by the time they're 2,
Mm-hmm.
and they should receive twice as many yeses.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that continues on. The parent should be a person who's able to praise their child when appropriate,
Mm-hmm.
and to give their child options that are healthy ones instead of just saying no all the time.
Right.
Oh, you can't do this, and if you do that, I'll take away your phone, or whatever the consequences might be that
Sure.
they try to uh, do. I mean, I think obviously consequences, logical and natural consequences, are the best.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes taking away a phone or limiting phone access might be a good consequence if your teen is over, overdoing it.
Hmm.
So, but anyway, any kind of I mentioned that that it's important maybe for uh, sometimes a father and son, a father and daughter, and I kind of look at this role for the father. It's more appropriate for the father in this sense
Hmm.
because the mother is the homemaker and the father is helping the child learn what the outside world outside the home is all about. And so the next list is about what a rite of passage might look like. And here's and this is there are four stages. And so I said the elders, our fathers, grandfathers, mothers, and grandmothers, can create meaningful ceremonies. And now in the Jewish tradition, they have the bar mitzvah and the I forget what the one is for girls. It's similar at about age 13. They have a ritual that is supposed to give that child sort of a launching pad into adulthood. Uh, Often that ritual too, for many Jewish kids I've talked to, didn't have the meaning it might have had. So here, the four stages, uh, giving your child an opportunity to review their life as a child. I think that's an important step. What if you liked about being a child? What were the high points for you in your growing up, and then maybe visions of what life could be as an adult. And one of my teachers once said, if you can vision it, you're halfway there. So and then another kind of separation move that often happens is that when a teen leaves high school, they join the military. Or if they go to college, they join a sorority or a fraternity. And also athletes, when they go to training camps or have tryouts for athletes, that is a rite of passage in itself, where they probably have to perform at their highest and their best, and it really tests them in terms of what skills and what kind of things they've developed that are could be considered to be important for a sports team. So then there's in the second stage, which actually could be part of that first stage, but it has to be a certain set of tests that the child is asked to do to show that they have some wherewithal as a teen and enough that they can get into uh, uh, be admitted into adulthood with some respect and some kind of a sense of that I earned this too. This wasn't just bestowed on me because of a nice guy or a nice gal. I earned it. And then sometimes it involves a weekend retreat with elders that create meaningful rituals for boys and girls. And then I said the Jewish boy and girl I have to sometimes memorize parts of the Torah in order to go through their ritual. And then Christians also have confirmation classes very often. I remember going through confirmation classes, and it was really a meaningful ritual to me. The joining of the church I joined, it meant a lot to me to have uh, passed the tests, so to speak, that were put before me. And so then the last step, the third step actually, is that the boy and girl proves themselves worthy by passing the series of tests, requiring a level of skill and maturity. I mean, such as a ropes course. If you know what that is, it's a course where they have to climb ropes and go over hurdles and do number of things that actually require cooperation. Rock climbing and rappelling is another activity. I've used that with some of my young students, and also river rafting. Out here in Colorado, we have a lot of rivers. We have one of the first, probably the top rivers in the country to raft. So there's a lot of opportunities there. And then wilderness camping and backpacking, just getting out of the norm and into the wilderness. Sometimes that in itself is a test for young men and young women. And then in the native culture, they usually have a solo experience involved. like they call it a vision quest, where they send the young, mostly it's the young men, and they go out on their own for 4 or 5 days without food or water, and they have to then fend for themselves and show that they can survive in a wilderness area on a solo experience. And then they come back and tell the elders what they experienced. And in some tribes, that leads them to take on a new name. If something happened to them during uh, the vision quest, like a herd of deer ran by them, well, then they might be their name might be Running Deer, or whatever kind of experience they had during their solo experience is regarded as very important in terms of their transition into adulthood. So those are some of the things that I'm aware of that are available out there. There also are groups that will conduct weekend workshops, weekend retreats with their elders, and they usually bring the father and maybe the mother as well along, and they set up the tests, they set up the rituals, and that's a worthwhile uh, uh, endeavor if you don't have the time, energy, uh, or even the ideas of what you might do in your own family with your own teens, is to look up online one of the groups that does rite of passage retreats on weekends. So those are kind of the things that I see, and I think that the other part of this that I began to see is that a rite of passage is the ultimate kind of way to reach this kind of adult to adult uh, relationship with a father or with a mother, and I think it really holds people back if they don't do that. So, with my clients, I do quite a bit of that. I have uh, with some of my clients, I have them write a letter to start with to either their mother or their father, and it the separation process has to be completed in such a way that it's an I'm okay, you're okay place. And so I say, start off with all the good things that you got, and make a list of all the things that you realize that your parent gave to you that really helped you along. Give them credit, and oftentimes parents don't feel like they get much credit. So that brightens their heart to start with, and then talk about, well, in order to really achieve what I want, which is a an adult to adult relationship, here's some things we need to talk about. And so I'd like to have a one on one with you and bring up some of the things and talk about. So that's a time when they can bring up the unfinished business and what keeps them still feeling like a child in the presence of their parents. And when my clients do that, they find many times, surprisingly, their parents are very receptive to this idea. They just don't know how to do it. So having the child taking the initiative on it is often a relief. Wow, my son or my daughter is apparently ready to be a full-fledged adult, because look at what they've done. They wrote this wonderful letter to me. I wrote one to my dad, and he was so moved by the letter that he called me in tears afterwards and said he was regretful that he had never done that for his dad. His dad died before he said I did it for him. And he carried that letter in his wallet for the rest of his life, and eventually, and often would bring it out and show it to people. So it really meant a tremendous amount, more than I ever realized it would. But I just wanted to get a completion with him, and that was my way of doing it. So, and my clients are doing a lot of that. So I've been talking with my clients about this, and I talked with this one young man who agreed to come on as a guest. Andres grew up in a Latino culture, and when I said, "Well, there aren't very many rites of passage in mainstream culture," he said, "Oh, we got a lot in our culture." So he's going to tell his story about the rites of passage that he experienced in his culture that helped him become an extremely responsible father and a very responsible adult. So, Andrus, come on board, and we'll have you share your story. Thanks for joining us today, and I was so moved by your story that that's why I've asked you to come on and tell our audience your story, because I think it amplifies what that those little kind of things in a culture that can make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'll get right into it. Well, to start, my name is Andres. As Dr. Weinhold introduced me, I am married. I've been married for 8 years, and now I have 3 children and a fourth one on the way. So it's a lot of pressure to try and be a good parent, right? And to get right into what Dr. Weinhold was talking about, I didn't see them as rites of passage until I spoke with him. And looking at that list, the what was it? The I have it right here: the separation, transition, and transformation, and reincorporation. We definitely do in at least in the area of Mexico where my parents are from. And the earliest memory I have of something like this happening, like some sort of rite of passage, was actually around the age of Ashley's son, 8 years old. And I used to wake up every day with my father to mow the lawn. Right, he started slowly transitioning um, these age appropriate tasks for me to do. And at that age, your dad's your hero. Your dad's stronger than Superman. And I used to see him run these machines, to mow the lawn, and he'd make it look real nice. And it was something that I wanted to do. So he slowly started, letting me um, mow the lawn, and then he would use the string trimmer. And I thought, wow, that's cool. I want to be as cool as my dad, and do the entire yard. So eventually, it was passed on to me to have the yard looking nice, right? So everything from the responsibility of checking the oil on the gas machines, making sure we have enough fuel, um, those 2 cycle engines that you have to mix oil in with the gasoline. So all of that became my responsibility, and it was an extremely important step in my development, because there was so many important tasks that needed to be done before you actually started mowing the lawn. And him passing those ropes on to me, I truly believe that it had a really strong effect in my development. Because now when I mow the lawn and it looks good, I'm like, yeah, this is because my dad taught me, right? And then I think the biggest rite of passage that I had and that we have in our culture was around the time when I was 16. So of course, from 8 to 16, I'm getting all these responsibilities, being thrown into more responsibilities of my own. But what truly solidified that transition from being a teenager to an adult, even if I was 16 years old, it was a hunting trip. And hunting is very prominent in the area of Mexico that my parents are from. They're very, very poor to this date. Um, my my grandma's house didn't have plumbing until about 15 years ago, type of poor. So they had to go out and hunt for their own food. So upland game birds, quails, doves, etc. They had deer. So hunting was a huge important way for them to get some meals in this part of Mexico. So when they came to the States and they emigrated, um, they found out that hunting was more of a sport here, and they continued to go hunting. And I grew up going hunting with my dad. And I remember I used to have the backpack with the waters, and my dad used to carry the firearms, and I'd walk with him. Um, he'd made me feel like I was helping him look for our game, our trophies, our hunts. And slowly, step by step, he started, giving me more responsibility. Um, he started me off with a small air rifle, and building my way up until I was old enough to carry my own firearm. I wasn't the water boy anymore. He would carry his own water. I would carry my own. And then the biggest event, that completely pushed me into adulthood was a hunting trip when I was 16 years old. We went to our yearly hunting trip, 3, 4 days out in the desert between the border of California and Arizona. And we would pack enough water, enough food for the 3, 4 days. And at that age, I was finally allowed to carry my own firearm that my dad bought for me. Everything legal, and it was registered to me with him as the responsible adult. I was carrying my own food, my own water, and something different happened in this hunting trip, because he, released me, and he allowed me to control my own firearm, my own paths. We would stalk our animals in different directions, and I decided to take my own route. Um, so when we came back from the hunt, when the sun goes down, I had more animals than all the elders. I'm talking my dad, his brother, his his friends from Mexico, cousins, uncles, um, uncles that taught him to hunt. I was now out hunting them, so I was finally in that group with the elders, right? And the moment that completely changed the relationship I had with my father was that, a little unresponsible, but he offered me my first beer after a successful hunt. And that to me was incredibly powerful, because for the first time probably all my life, I came home. My dad was my hero. He's always been up here. And then for the first time in my life, I came back to the campsite with more animals than anyone else, and that was incredibly powerful to feel that I was going to be the provider for our meal. And then my dad offering me to have a drink with him, uh, after a successful hunting day. It just put us right here for that moment. That importance that Dr. Weinhold describes. Like, we were we were equals at that point. And ever after that, every hunting trip after that, he didn't look at me as, this young son that needed to be um, watched over, or constantly making sure I'm okay with a firearm behind him. That was one of the biggest moments that that I would consider a rite of passage in our culture. And as I'm, going through these rites of passage, I see, uncles bringing on their children, 8 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old, going through the same steps that I did. You know, the younger ones carrying the water, carrying the food. The ones that are old enough, carrying a small air rifle, something not too dangerous for them to give them that feeling that they're, becoming more responsible, more closer to adulthood. And so that was probably one of the biggest moments, in that I consider a rite of passage. Something else that's huge in our Latino community is road trips. So in December, it is very customary for families from all over Mexico, not just where I'm from. Maybe you guys have even seen uh, news articles how in December the the borders by land get so jam packed by travelers. You know, people talk about sitting 8 hours in the lines to cross over back to the United States because traveling by car is such a huge deal in our community. And it's crazy to think of, but we're talking tens of thousands of families driving to Mexico for the holidays and driving back in January, to the point that you spend 8 hours sitting in the car in every port of entry, right? That's how prominent road trips are in our community. Well, another huge step for me to become an adult and seen as an adult by my father was the moment he allowed me to drive our whole family to our road trip. You know, again, going back to my dad was always, my superhero. You know, he was my hero. And when I used to see my dad sit behind the wheel for 10 hours straight, hitting highway speeds nonstop, getting us from point A to point B safely, I used to think that was, real cool. I was a little kid seeing my dad drive. I just sit behind him and just stare at all his movements. So when I finally got the chance and the opportunity to, take those ropes, sit behind the steering wheel, and m- I was given the responsibility to transport my family from point A to point B with my dad sitting next to me as a passenger. That was another powerful moment because just because it's such a prominent event in our community, I felt like I was a cool one now, right? So I'm the one transporting my family. I'm the one that chooses the route to get to our destination. And from that point forward, it gave me the confidence to now be able to take those road trips with my wife and my son and daughters. And that was really important to me because it showed me that not only did he trust me with small tasks like mowing the lawn, dangerous tasks like carrying a firearm, he trusted me with the well-being and safety of our entire family. And uh, a kind of self-appointed rite of passage that goes through our community is marriage. And I call it self-appointed because in in our community, we don't ask for our girlfriend's hand, our fiance's hand in marriage. Being truthfully, we call it in our Latino culture, robar, steal, because that's essentially what we do, and that's what I did. That's what my dad did to my mom, um, my brother-in-law to my sisters. We just show up. We decided we're gonna get married, and she takes off with me. That's extremely customary, and we do not ask for their hand in marriage. We just show up that we decide we want to get married, and she takes off with me, and that's kind of like a self-appointed rite of passage because everyone that's married from the community that we come from, they all did that. They all just show up, steal the daughter, go back the next day and be like, oh, we're married now.
Mhm.
And that was important for me to tell my dad, like, hey, dad, I'm going to Mexico this year and I'm only going for 10 days because I'm going to go pick her up and we're going to fly back because we're starting a life together. And from that point forward, when I told my dad and I showed him the ring, we did everything backwards. She came with me first, then I gave her a ring. So I still proposed, but she was, already my wife. And in our culture, as soon as you take off with your boyfriend, you guys are married. And that's what everyone did until this day. That's what they continue to do. So that rite of passage, it's kind of like that final step for Latinos to become an adult, to become a husband, and to become a father. And when I was going to talk to my dad that I was going to um, take off with my girlfriend, I was going to show him the ring, and my hands were like this because the Latino culture, you always respect your parents, and no matter what, they're always right. And I was scared that he was going to tell me that I wasn't ready. And when I told him, like, hey, I'm gonna go pick her up, and if you allow me to keep living here, I'm gonna start paying you rent, and I'm gonna make a life with her. And he looked at me and he was like, "Are you serious? Is that why you're shaking?" And he was like, "No, congratulations. Like, I hope that's really what you want, and I hope you guys are happy." And hearing that from him just shattered that, that space that we've been, chipping away at with every one of those rites of passage, right? From mowing the lawn, when I was little, trusting me with firearms, trusting me with the safety of our family, and our road trips, and to finally congratulating me on taking the next step to get married and start a family. That was when I didn't see it at the time, because something more important happened in the future. But that was as extremely important as every other step, to adulthood. And the final one that Dr. Weinhold already hinted at was when I became a father. And of course, with COVID and everything, my parents uh, wouldn't come visit. We wouldn't go visit, and during that time, we went from our first child to three. So it was extremely difficult as Hispanic, Mexican, um, American Mexican Americans raising kids, because we were raised a completely different way than what is you know appropriate, to be honest. La chancla, the flip flop that gets thrown at you, that's not a myth. That actually happened, and it continues to happen in Mexico. A slap across the face with the mop, like that's just, those aren't fake stories. Those are actual events that we went through. And of course, in today's times, that's just completely looked down upon, and it's not something that I would like to do. Not just because I would get in trouble, but it's not the way that I would want to raise my kids. um, I love my parents, but I wouldn't want to raise my kids the way they raised me. And that's the huge challenge, because you're going against everything that you're. I was lucky enough to have um, my great grandma see that I got married. So going against everything, I'm talking 100 years ago. My great grandma lived to be 102. Uh, going against her beliefs, going against my grandma's beliefs, going against my parents and my mom's beliefs, was extremely difficult. And one thing that completely um, opened the eyes of my dad and my mom was the way we spoke to our kids. Even my youngest, he's 1.5. We talk to him like we're talking to an adult, and he's allowed to say no. My daughters are allowed to tell us they don't want to do something, and we accept it, right? Like, no, I don't want to do that. Okay, what do you want to do? you know I never had that choice. It was, no, you're not going to do that, and that's it, right? And and as I'm trying to parent my child, the times that my dad and my mom would come to visit, they're sitting in the background just watching. And I think the most important day of my rite of passage, even though I'm a father of three, was when my dad, in you know in front of the entire family, in front of my wife, in front of my sisters, he came up to us and he was like, "You know what? I am really proud on how you are raising your kids. I wish I wouldn't have raised my voice at you, raised my hands at your sisters. I really regret how I treated you when you guys were small, because seeing how you talk to your kids and seeing how they don't respond with uh, louder tantrums, we diffuse the situation instead of just doing it the old school Mexican way, and the one that yells louder is the one that gets their way. and the kid usually ends up crying in the corner uh, with the flip flop thrown across the room, right? So hearing my dad tell me, I wish I would have done what you're doing, really, really, brought my relationship with my dad right here. I still thought that I had to look behind my shoulder to see if my dad was approving of what I was doing. But since I was 8 years old, that I can remember, we were chipping away at that, you know, um, the two different levels. When he finally told me that he wished, and not to put words in his mouth, but I felt that he was telling me, I wish I would have been a father to you like you are to your kids. And hearing that just completely, blew me away. I felt I was getting a little bit emotional, and my sister was like, "Oh, you know what? Like, yeah, um, you did, raise your voice, raise your hand at us, but look, we didn't turn out that bad. Like, you don't have to feel bad. We forgive you. We know you didn't know what it was like to have a good father, because of course he had an abusive childhood as well. If hearing, the flip flop getting thrown across the room, that's nothing compared to how he was raised as a kid. So there was a lot of forgiveness in that conversation. My wife heard it too. That he wasn't scared to say how he regretted the way he raised us, or at least to certain aspects. And hearing that, as a father of three, sitting in the same room as my dad, the person that I considered to be my hero, the person that I grew up, wanting to be like him, wanting to be that cool person mowing the lawn, driving across the country, being the best hunter in the group of friends, wanting to be as good of a dad as he was to me, to finally him telling me that he wishes he was as good of a dad as I was. That just completely, um, leveled our relationship, because no longer did he see himself above me. He saw himself right there with me, and it helped me not see myself below him. It helped me, again, using the figurative um, language that Dr. Weinhold always expresses. Our relationship was finally um, equal. We consider ourselves equal now, and I think those rites of passage, was extremely important to get to where we are today. Even something as insignificant as mowing the lawn, it had a huge impact on how I developed into as an adult.
Those are great examples of how just everyday kind of things that can be built into a rite of passage and lead you to where you want to be as an adult to adult, with your father. And so thank you so much for sharing that story. It's a very moving story.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for having me.
All right. Ashley, do you have anything to add?
No, that was great. I really thought through a lot of not only my own childhood, which is totally different, obviously, on many levels, but kind of how I can apply that for. I have two boys, so
Yeah.
lots to learn. But no, it was great. Thank you for sharing.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll move on to next time. And
Yeah. What do you have for us next week?
well, I have another guest next time.
Wonderful.
Again, a man who has a very unusual story. He actually was able to reach this with his father after his father was dead.
Hmm.
He'll have a very interesting story. And he's also a musician,
Oh.
and he's going to share some of his music. He wrote a song for his father.
Ah.
And then he also was in Las Vegas when that big shooting happened.
Hmm.
And he wrote a song imagining what it must be like to be a shooter like that. So again, the theme of how these rites of passage and how the kind of ability for boys, particularly, to become men has to be somewhere in the in the planning for parents. And I think many of the mass shooters are boys who never became men,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately. So that's why I think it's a part of how we help prevent that kind of activity from happening. So that's what we'll do next time.
Wonderful. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much. And thank you to our guests as well for sharing. It was a wonderful episode.
Yeah.
Until next time.
Thanks.
For more information, please visit the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership at CICRCL.org or click the link in the show notes.